Thank you, Anne, for that welcome. Good afternoon, all. My name is Jennifer Sun, and I'm the co-executive director of Asian Americans for Equality. I send my greetings with the other co-executive director of AFI, Thomas Yu, who unfortunately could not be here today because he's under the weather, but he does send his regards and his welcome as well. We welcome you to the 11th Annual Asian American Community Development Conference. We are pleased to be hosting this conference with the Asian American Federation, and we also thank Bank of New York Mellon for being a contributing sponsor to this event. I also wanted to thank AFI and the Federation staff for their support in organizing this conference. Since coming on board during the summer, Thomas and I have reconnected with many old friends, and we're looking forward to forging new friendships. AFI's roots are in civil rights and community activism. This conference is an opportunity to reflect together on challenges we face as community-based organizations and community advocates, with Asian American communities experiencing the widest income inequality of all racial groups in the country. We are also here to create a space for creating and bringing together different perspectives for increasing equitable access to elite schools and the role of Asian Americans in the policy reform process. The purpose of this conference is also to explore new strategies for political organizing and including Asian Americans in developing more equitable policies. And we also hope to imagine together what civic engagement in immigrant communities and cross-racial organizing might look like in an increasingly polarized and divisive political environment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joanne Yu, and I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Federation. We are an umbrella organization, a leadership organization that works with about 70 nonprofits that serve the Asian American community. We're a census information center. And I'll just be really honest that it's kind of weird for me to be here because I used to be an AFI staff member. And it was, I remember doing conference number 1, 2, and 3. So I know what all of the logistics that go into making this conference possible. So when Jen and Tom said they were going to do this, I was really thrilled to partner with them. It is, Tom and Jen are old friends and colleagues, and Tom and Jen and I used to sit on the same floor, and we used to have an office on Grand Street, and we used to hang out together afterwards. So when the new leadership came, when they both became co-leads, and there was an opportunity for us to work together and to talk about what our community needs are and about what resources we bring, I think, I couldn't say no. So I will tell you that when this conference started 11 years ago, the reason why we did it was because there was so little information presented about the Pan-Asian community. And I think in many ways, my fight these days, it's with like these mainstream institutions like the Times, right? But they want me to give them these quotes. And I have to say to them, well then why do you always report my community as the other? Like when you do surveys, you say blacks, Latinos, whites, and other, right? And so I think the conference was really in response to that attitude, the prevailing attitude that, we're not really seen as Americans, and no matter how many generations you've been here, you're not really seen as an American. We are still labeled as the other. And so this conference really is a mechanism to present information about who we are, what our needs are, why we deserve to ask for the things that we do, how we contribute, and as Jennifer said, in an increasingly polarizing world, I think this is a really unique space for us to come together to say, here are the things that matter to every Asian community, and these are the things that are important to us, and to really understand what our shared values are. So I know Howard is walking out to get some water, but it is my job to introduce him. Howard is the Asian American Federation's Research and Policy Director, and if you've worked in the community for any length of time, Howard is very familiar to you, and if you've done any grant writing or done any research about Asian Americans, you probably use some of Howard's research. Howard is, one of the things he always says, we need to the work that we do, it needs to come from a factual basis about, and looking at the numbers, what do we need, who we are. And I think, one of the pleasures of being an executive director is to work with folks like Howard who is very thoughtful, and he's meticulous about presenting great information. He's incredibly low-key, and he'll never tell you this, but a lot of the he sits on the Census Advisory Group, and a lot of the things that, the how we get counted and some of the wins that we've had, it's really been his advocacy work. So it's my pleasure to honor Howard Sheep.
Hi, don't think I'm getting an award today, am I? But thank you again, both to AFI staff and the Federation staff, for this opportunity to talk about our report that we released earlier this year. I think many of you have already seen it, so what I want to do is use it as a way to provide context for the discussions that will happen later this afternoon. And hopefully you will hear some new things, and hopefully you will be able to take away some stuff for your own work as we go forward. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to basically talk about a few things. One, to give you a little bit of background. I think Jennifer and Joanne have already touched on some of the things that have been happening in our community in terms of people realizing that the model minority myth is exactly that, a myth. There's reports from mainstream organizations now, not just from Asian organizations, that are emphasizing the fact that there's a huge amount of inequality within our community. So there was a Pew Center report just earlier this year that looked at income inequality, and within the Asian community, income inequality is greater than any other race or ethnic group across the country. And a lot of it has to do with immigration patterns, the way immigration policy is made in the United States, and that has a huge impact on who comes into the country, what opportunities they have, and what kind of skills they're able to bring. There's also a 2016 Center for American Progress report that looked at wealth meaning the accumulation of resources. And then within the Asian community, again, we see Asian Americans have the highest rates of wealth inequality. National Capacity also did a report in 2013, and it's found that within the Asian community, the population of people living in poverty was increasing at one of the highest rates in the country as well. So pretty much the same as Hispanic Americans. So it was like 38% growth from the time period they were looking at versus 43% for the Hispanic community. So we see there's a huge unmet need within our community. Is the microphone working, or is it cutting in and out? It's working, okay. So that sort of provides context for the national. So what we did is we looked at, for our report, and it was an update to our earlier report in 2008, looking at Asian American poverty within New York City. We wanted to be very specific and look at what's the challenges within New York City. So that's, generally the goal of the report is we want to show there's huge diversity within our community. But the second is to provide a fundamental basis using data to talk about the issues that are facing the people that are most that have the most need in our communities. We want to look at what are the challenges that they face, both education-wise, economic barriers, language-wise, and that kind of thing. So that's the general gist of why we wanted to do our report. So to kick things off, I want to go a little inside baseball and talk about how we measure poverty in the United States. So there's a federal poverty measure that is used to make policy, used to determine how federal funds are spent, how money is allocated to schools for school lunches, how community block grants are allocated. And that poverty measure was created in the 60s, and it was based largely on how much did you need to eat in order to stay alive, and then how much did that cost, and then used a multiplier to multiply. This should be the income level for somebody to subsist in the United States. So it doesn't take into account things like other costs of living, like housing, clothing, transportation, things like that. And so now we are relying on a measure that was sort of created because there was a very serious lack of data just about poverty in the United States as they were doing the Great Society, and now we're relying on that measure to make policy decisions in the United States, policy allocations. So what they did within the last 10 years is to develop something called an alternative or supplemental poverty measure. And this is more recently built up. So if you look at budgets of actual people that are living in the United States, trying to estimate what the minimum budgets you need to live in different areas of the country, so there's more regional variation, so you take into account housing costs and things like that. And then you also bring into the mix the impact of non-cash assistance, things like food stamps, Section 8, and other policy benefits that help people living in poverty gain more resources in order to better their lives. So if you look at the federal poverty measure, that would be the green on the right side, you see that Asians are not only doing better than blacks and Hispanics, but if you take into account the alternative poverty measure, and this is measured, so the mayor's office has actually implemented this alternative poverty measure specifically for New York City, you see that Asians actually have the highest poverty rate in the city. And this is largely because Asian Americans are unable to, because of federal policies, you can't access benefits until you're in the country for 5 years, language barriers, concerns about public charge, which we could talk about in the discussion period, are discouraging people from applying for benefits. So in that ends up decreasing the amount of resources people have available and increasing the rates of poverty if you look at the supplemental or the alternative poverty measure. So I want to use that to set the stage. When you hear about federal poverty levels and you think, you look at the top line numbers that are the official numbers, you think Asians are doing reasonably okay, but that's not the case. There are many, many challenges that the Asian community faces in terms of accessing resources. Do I have somebody time checking me? I just want to know. Nobody? Oh, okay, all right. Otherwise I can keep on going forever. So within our report, we wanted to emphasize the fact that it's a very diverse community with a diversity of experiences. So just by looking at Asian ethnic poverty rates, see that Pakistani and Bangladeshis, which also happen to be the fastest growing portion of the Asian American population, also have the highest poverty rates. And then you go all the way down to the Filipino community, which is highly educated, working in very fast-growing sectors such as healthcare and tech, have a very low poverty rate, at least for the residents, those residing in New York City. Excuse me. So if we dive deeper into the data and we take a look at how different with our community is and how diverse it is, if we look at just by immigration, so those who were born in the United States, those who are naturalized citizens, those who are not yet citizens, you see that on the immigrant side of things, you have higher poverty rates compared to their counterparts in the non-Asian community. And so you see the challenges of adapting to life in the United States even exists for those who have already naturalized. And then you also see that issue too, if you look at how long people have been in the United States. For the Asian immigrants, those that are more recent arrivals have a much harder time than comparable recent arrivals in the non-Asian community. But as you see, as they sort of age in, either they leave the country or they find their way up the economic ladder. So you can interpret the data two ways on the right-hand side. So we see resiliency within the community. We also see a lot of challenges and real needs, particularly for recent arrivals. We also see that the Asian community is very bimodal. We have a challenge in our community where we have a lot of really well-educated people, and we also have a lot of people who've never graduated high school. So if you look at just the people that are living in poverty, both Asian and non-Asians, you see that Asians living in poverty are both more likely to have not graduated from high school and also more likely to have a college degree. So we have challenges in terms of who's coming to the country and what kind of skills they're bringing to the table. For the people with high educational background, we have challenges in terms of bringing their credentials to the United States and being able to have those credentials recognized. We also have a lot of people who are coming here with low amounts of skills, and how do we help those people build those skills, the language and the educational and workplace skills, to help them climb the economic ladder. So as a consequence, we see a lot of specific challenges within the Asian community. We look at healthcare coverage, for example. We see that low-income Asians both are less likely to have healthcare coverage than non-Asian, low-income non-Asians, as well as higher-income Asians. So you see that the last one is in each section, the 21% from the 18 to 46 is non-Asian, poor non-Asians. They have similar rates, but the Asians are hit by a small amount as well. So we see, even with programs in place that help seniors and children like CHIP and Medicare, we still have slightly higher rates for low-income and poor Asians, whether it's due to lack of knowledge or lack of eligibility, or even language barriers and other reasons for not applying for the available programs. So we still have remaining challenges there. So I know one of the sections coming up will be talking about children, specifically about schools. If we look at child poverty rates in New York City, and we compare 2000 with 2016, we see that both for Asians and for non-Hispanic whites, the poverty rate has been going up. And then if you couple that with the rapid growth in the Asian community, the number of children that are actually Asian children living in poverty has really skyrocketed within New York City. So if you look at how, just a couple of highlights within their living situations, you see that for Asian children, the vast majority of them live in two-parent households. Part of it is cultural, part of it is that they really need to, if you look at the number of workers for within the family that a child lives in, about 28% have 2 or more workers. And so if you don't have access to a social safety net, your only option is to go out and work, whatever job you can, and send multiple people out to find work to help you make ends meet. And so that's the kind of environment children are living in. Even though they have two-parent households, both parents are working, and often, you have an uncle or a elder brother or an older sibling or also working and contributing to the family income. So you might not have as much adult supervision as home as a two-parent family suggests. Seniors are also a really big challenge for the Asian community, because not only we have significant portions of our community that are not eligible for the social safety net, we also have a really, as the generation that immigrated post-1965, with immigration reforms start to age into the process, we're seeing a huge growth in the Asian senior population. And what's concerning for us is that we're seeing that the Asian senior poverty rate is going up from 2000 to 2016, and the trend seems to be continuing that way. And so what we need to do is figure out what's their living situation, what kinds of services do they need, and how do we bring those services to that community. So if we look at from the citizenship perspective, about a third of Asians that are seniors that are living in poverty do not have their citizenship yet. Compared to the non-Asian senior side, only 13% of those are non-citizens yet. So you have a basic lack of accessibility to particular social safety net, the social safety net benefits and programs. If you look at the other side, you see a reliance on living with family, right? Over half of Asian seniors are living with a married couple family, whether it's with a married child or with their spouse. The data's not, you'd have to dig in really deep in the data to figure out what the exact family compositions are, but essentially they're living in a family environment, versus for the non-Asian seniors, the majority of them are living alone. Part of it is that Asian seniors still tend to be on the younger side, so you still have both couples still alive, But as that cohort ages, as that first generation that immigrated in 65 ages, we'll probably see a big shift in terms of the living situations for those individuals. And then finally, wanted to look at working adults. We see a similar trend with the other age groups where Asian poverty is increasing, Asian poverty rates are increasing. So we have concerns about how do we address that particular issue. So what we wanted to look at is what are the industries and what are the occupations that working poor Asians are employed in. So from an occupational perspective, there's similar occupations with sort of the rest of the working poor in the city as well, but there are in bold particular occupational categories are sort of unique and stand out for the Asian community. So there's specifically, these are the top 15 occupational categories, and we see that there's basically chefs and cooks, nail salon or beauty salon workers. You still see the garment industry providing a substantial number of jobs, although it's still in decline. And then the category, the drivers, sales workers, and truck drivers, those are mostly food delivery workers or other delivery workers. And they're not actually driving cars. If you've been following some of the news recently, there's a crackdown on the use of electric bikes that has come mainly on the backs of food delivery workers, both Hispanic and Asians. Okay, I'm almost that great. And then if you look at the industries, you see some similar reflections. Food service is a huge category. 1 in 5 working poor Asians are in food services, but that's similar to the rest of the working poor in New York City as well. But specific to Asians is, beauty salon, nail salon. Garment industry still provides about 3% of the jobs for those people, for the working poor in the Asian community. And then I still haven't figured out why that's the case, but securities commodities industry also pops up, which is really interesting. So I'm wondering, how do you count income? Maybe they're hiding their income or something, or they're just somebody else. They're working in different occupations in that particular industry. They could be janitorial staff or something like that, but I'm not sure. I'd love to hear any insights or theories as to why that was going on. So as a result, we always want to be able to use the data for something, right? We want to be able to make policy recommendations that are grounded in this data that we presented. And so what we found in just talking with our member agencies and just working in the community is that we have a few recommendations that are sort of focused on helping Asian Americans climb the economic ladder. Since they don't have access, in a lot of cases, to the social safety net, and there's ongoing challenges like public charge that are going to decrease people's ability to access those benefits. We thought that it was good to sort of emphasize the fact that we really need to develop economic opportunity for low-wage immigrant workers. And how do we do that? We need to both help them develop the work skills and create English, workplace English language classes, things like that, to help them build the skills they need to get out of some of the low-paying jobs that don't really have a huge career opportunity for them. But we also recognize the fact that we need to be working with Asian-owned businesses. In a separate report that we did a few years ago, we looked at the impact of Asian-owned businesses on New York City, and we found about half of net new employment and half of net new economic activity that was generated was due to Asian-owned businesses. And so, we have Queens, which is is the largest. I like to tease my colleagues in Los Angeles about the fact, but Queens is the county with the largest number of Asian American businesses in the country. We need to do a better job of supporting them. There have been controversies in the past, but a lot of the challenges that we find is that a lot of them are learning their business practices from the previous owners, and they're not aware of what are the new regulations that come rolling down the pipeline. There's no clear way for them to develop. In Flushing, there's no small business development center for some reason, when Flushing has a huge number of Asian entrepreneurs. So we need to find a better way of supporting our small business owners because they're providing the jobs. And we need to make sure, certainly we need to make sure those jobs are high quality and are meeting regulations and things like that. But we need to support them in order to do those, to continue to grow their businesses and to expand beyond just the markets that they have right now. We also saw that affordable health care remains a vital part of the challenge for the poor Asian community, for both for everyone, but particularly for low wage Asian workers. We certainly want to look forward to the state continuing health navigators and other programs that help bring more people into coverage. And then finally, to address seniors, we need to build accessible support systems for Asian seniors. And that's not just more than just senior centers. We need to find ways, while our Asian senior population remains fairly on the young side, creating opportunities for them to build an employment experience and to build up the work experience and pay the taxes to be able to build up the ability to access social safety nets like Social Security and things like that, and Medicare. But we also need to find opportunities to help them engage with the broader community. There are mental health issues, which is a topic for another time. But certainly we need to build support systems that are in place to help them both maintain their economic as well as their mental well-beings. So I'll leave that at that. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Joanne will run.
All right, so is there a mic? Q&A mics? Or, okay, so questions. Everything up here that you presented is fair game. I just want to highlight what Howard said about what's happening in our community. With public charge, what that's looking like. This is the comment period, and I know a lot of you work with community organizations. We need to have as many comments as possible, and you need to make it really unique to what you're seeing on the ground. I think it's not just that we're used to doing all of these long sign-on letters, but this one, it is like you need to get as much out there. We need to generate 20 letters, 30 letters, hundreds of letters, not one long sign-on. This is the strategy that we're using nationally. So if you belong to a nonprofit organization, please send in a letter and talk about why it's important, because I will tell you that every nonprofit organization that in our network that's helping people to access food stamps and all these safety net programs, people are coming in droves begging to be disenrolled. So they have the right to have all of these safety net programs because they pay their taxes and they need to have these programs to be able to eat, but they're saying, God knows what's going to happen. Please, please, please get me out of food stamps, get me out of Medicaid. And so what's happening right now is really, really scary. And so as we talk about poverty, please understand that there are things that we can do. I know that right now there's, it's really hard not to feel helpless these days. But there are things that we can do as a community, and there is a way for us to show up for people who are often invisible in our community. So with that, question? Really? We're talking about the elections? Anything we can talk about? We're also a census information center, so anything you guys wanna ask any questions about the census? Is there?
I just have a question. Earlier you were talking about when it comes to Asian small business owners and what you can do to help them when it comes to, and what you can do or what we can do to help them when it comes to the growth and development. Are we talking more of education, mentoring, regulatory, or actual partnering with these businesses and business owners? Sure. If you could expand on that.
I think it's sort of all of the above. I think a lot of so maybe top on the wish list is sort of how do they engage with the resources that are available at the city and the state level. A lot of them are unaware of programs that are in place. I'll give you one example. There's upcoming legislation to help upcoming legislation on environmental regulations for laundromats, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of a lot of them are unaware of both the new regulations and what is required, and unaware of programs that are in place, existing programs that are in place that are supposed to help them with the capital investments that they need to make. And so a lot of it is language. A lot of the issue is accessibility. We have a program that's ongoing helping Union Street small businesses. Eric, wave your hand. He's the head of our office in Flushing that's helping those small businesses deal with the issues. And so they'll come to our office and say, we need help dealing with these particular regulations. And when we call the city, they said, you have to bring everybody down to Manhattan because our language capabilities is only in Manhattan, right? And so you have, small business owners who have to take a whole day off, go into the city to deal with with these challenges. So it's accessibility. It's about having knowledge about how to even take care of these matters. And so it's like I said, it's almost all of the above.
But can I add that I think one of the challenges of not just the Asian American community, but communities of color, we never complain. Like, honestly, like there are things. I'll walk into a commissioner's office and I'm ready to do battle and I'll say XYZ blah 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 in my community, and they're like, well, there were 2 complaints from your community, and I know that's not the case because I know it impacts thousands and thousands of people, but we never ask for anything, so therefore we never get anything. And I mean, this is like that, like, some of us, Jennifer, Federation, there's a lot of folks here that we work with on a regular basis. We are always ready to do battle to say, here are the things that we need for our community, and here are the things that we need for those who are the most marginalized. And I will tell you that, like, by the time we get into talk to all the leadership, they're like, yeah, well, nobody said anything, so we don't know, right? So I think one of the things that we need to start to be better about is to say, yeah, we need help. Nobody ever complains about anything. And I don't know if it's cultural, I don't know if it's just the system is set up, but unless you let the folks who are doing the on-the-ground advocacy work, if you don't let us know, there's nothing we can do, right? Like, in some ways, we're really good at organizing. AFI started as a group to organize, and if you don't let them know, like, here's what's happening in this housing arena, here's what's happening, like, there's nothing we can do. It almost, in some ways, you're tying our hands. And so, small business, immigration, safety net programs, we need to speak up as a community, and we need to stand in solidarity because, why we don't get things is because they don't, in many ways, because we don't complain, we don't exist in the system. So, other questions? Sure.
I just want to go back to the slide about sort of breaking down poverty by the different ethnicities. So Asian American, Pacific Islanders are very wide, a category with a lot of different ethnicities. And you mentioned, Howard, that the community is very bimodal. So how do we build solidarity amongst the different Asian American groups? I think if we disaggregate data when it comes to things like funding, right? I think there are certain ethnicities, I would say like East Asian, that are more on the higher income versus the poverty rates with some of the other ethnicities, like you mentioned, Bangladesh and Pakistani.
That's a very, very good question. Joanne? No.
He's got a protest. That's my answer.
I mean, I would challenge you on the East Asian because if you look at the Chinese, they're like the 4th highest poverty rates in the city, in that particular list. I think what we have to do is recognize that low-income Asians are active contributors to our economy. They are the people that cook for you. They're the people that deliver the food to you. They're the people that do your laundry. They're the people that drive you places. They're the people that are doing your nails. And so we need to figure out how to create an environment where they have the ability to pursue their hopes and dreams, right? So a lot of so I think that's part of how we want to be able to give that message. The other thing is that if you look at the Asian community, while we're growing fast and we're now 16% of the population, we're diverse enough so that if we are just care about, if it's just the Chinese population, Chinese are less than half of the Asian population here now. It's in the city. So if you don't work in solidarity across, just at a minimally across the Asian community, you are diluting the available influence that you have. And I think that we've also had discussions with other members of communities of color, Blacks and Hispanics. If we all work together as a group, we would be I'm not sure if we're minority yet. I think we are very close. So there is a lot of benefits for youth working together because we share a lot of the common issues in terms of immigration, job access, education, caring for our seniors and families. So I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Other questions? Jennifer?
I wondered if you could talk about the significance, but also the difference between income inequality and wealth inequality. So just to repeat my question, I wanted Howard to explain, not assume that all of us understand what's the significance of talking about income inequality, but also wealth inequality. Because the way I understand it is that with income inequality, it is about the point that we have the challenge of a lot of Asian immigrants being concentrated in lower wage jobs, and hence their income growth is very stagnant. And then with wealth inequality, it's more about assets. And so how does, for example, homeownership and the challenges that we're facing in Asian American communities of providing access to homeownership with the housing costs in New York City, could that be impacting our ability to build assets and other forms of wealth, and then even transferring that wealth to future generations? When we think about perhaps businesses, small businesses in neighborhoods like Chinatown, where we have a few success stories, right, where some restaurants have been successfully passed on to the next generation. But I wonder if there might be an opportunity for us to, as community development organizations, be able to support more of that to happen.
I think you did a really good job of describing the difference between income and inequality. And I think income inequality is actually easier to use because a lot of survey data collects income. Wealth, the challenge with looking at wealth inequality within the Asian communities, that the surveys that are tracking wealth done by the government more often than not lump Asians together in one category if we're lucky, or lump them together as the other category, so black, white, other. I think it's getting better as there are more Asians and more people are existing in the sample, but that's the challenge. But it is important because wealth is a way to weather the storm, right? It is a way for people, if you have accumulated assets, you can make it through a loss of a job. You can find other opportunities. You have more time. One of the reasons why people stay in the lower income is that they are unable to with a health issue, or you lose an automobile outside the city, for example. Those are the issues, and that's why it's important to be able to look at wealth inequality. So, like Jennifer is saying, so how do we figure out ways to increase the ability to build assets and wealth? There was a report by the Department of Labor maybe 4 or 5 years ago that looked at the impact of the Great Recession on the Asian community. I think the Asian community had either the largest or the second largest drop in wealth because of a lot of the assets in our community are tied to house ownership. And so figure out how do we diversify our community's exposure to the vagrancies of the housing market that we're seeing almost maybe another dip in housing prices or stagnation in housing prices already. How do we help build wealth beyond just buying homes or small businesses?
So I saw Suki's hand. So Suki.
As usual, Howard's data is wonderful, and is it possible for us to get hard copies or?
Yeah. The slide, I can email it to you, but our reports are all available on our website, aafederation.org. And if you look under resources, there's a menu item called publications, and you'll find it there.
But this presentation, Jennifer, we'll send it to you and you can send that out to all of your guests?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great,
I believe
Other-
Ed already has a copy.
great. Other questions? If not, I think we're gonna end early so everybody can run to the bathroom before the next panel. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting us to this.